Hello everyone, and welcome to another Tech Talk with Digital Jersey. Today we're going to be talking about intelligent automation with Deloitte. And speaking today, we have Simeon Moss, Head of Jersey Advisors and Consulting Teams, and David Adams, Associate Director, heading up all the RPA and AI exciting stuff that he gets to play around with. Very jealous of that situation. Today is something a little bit different. We have a Slido poll. There will be a couple of questions during the poll. So you have the details that are up on the screen there, and they'll be there later as well. And I'll stick them in the Q&A. So feel free to ask Q&A in the usual way and join Slido for that kind of polls that will be coming forward. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Simeon, and he will tell you much more about it than I can. Hello.
Great, thank you, Rory, for the introduction. And welcome everybody. So I think in today's session, we really wanted just to highlight some of the innovations that we're seeing in automation. I think everybody will be familiar with robotic process automation and RPA, but we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months really an acceleration in how automation is being utilized across organizations. So we'll be sharing some insights from our global survey, and David will then be sort of going into some of the detail around those innovations, particularly around how cloud is being used and adopted, and just some of how AI is being incorporated into RPA to deliver a sort of an increased set of benefits. Please ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be leaving time at the end for Q&A. Thank you. Okay, so I think one thing I've spoken about this sort of previously at last year's Tech Week is that it's very unlikely now that strategic business decisions are being made without an associated technology discussion. I think technology is enabling most operations within firms, whether that is at the implementation stage yet or just at the strategic level. It's very clear that that's the case. So we're now into a time where the sort of ability to connect, collaborate, innovate has gone exponential in our view. And it's sort of creating sort of remarkable new possibilities for the businesses, but also more broadly with society. And although artificial intelligence has become ubiquitous and widely spoken about in many ways, I think helping to guide strategies, improve processes and shape business models and rethink customer experiences is still a sort of new area for growth for many firms locally. And we're only just scratching the surface at the moment. So what does this actually then mean? So it's not just about a debate of people versus machines. I think at Deloitte, we're sort of seeing all of this technology being about augmenting what humans do within the workplace to actually improve employees' lives as well as that of the customer, and actually deliver a number of benefits sort of powered through and underpinned through data, improved analytics, and the ability to sort of automate with intelligence. And I think finally, one thing that we should all be conscious of in terms of this technology adoption is actually this needs to be done responsibly, has to be done within the context of the regulatory framework, and really there's sort of quite a large focus on how ethics, avoiding bias in data starts to get incorporated into these solutions. So I think where we're sort of seeing a number of trends, particularly in the sort of investment and wealth management sector. So customers are getting more savvy with regards to technology and their expectations, and sort of really expecting a sort of digital first experience in the way that they engage with organizations. Secondly, adoption of cloud, and particularly post-pandemic, where most organizations will have sort of moved their operations into the cloud, data applications, the advent of platform as a service, software as a service, and infrastructure as a service, all sort of provide sort of great opportunity to sort of reduce the cost of processing, but also the ability to sort of scale on those platforms. There's then the opportunity and impetus to sort of move to a greater range and probably sort of a more complex range of products. And I think particularly in the environmental, social and governance, ESG space, that use of data to support alternative assets is sort of really growing at a sort of rapid rate, where you're sort of now requiring sort of new external sets of data to actually validate ESG credentials and provide more transparency. And then I think as a final point, we're sort of seeing RPA sort of moving away from being just a sort of initial sort of cost efficiency saving, where now it's what we're sort of determining a sort of save to transform mechanism, where you're actually taking this as an opportunity, and this is probably across an ecosystem of different technologies that are all built together within the cloud, is then actually being able to sort of reimagine your processes as well as just transforming what you've got today. So moving into some of the trends that we're seeing in intelligent automation. So the ecosystem for intelligent automation certainly hasn't stood still, and there are a number of sort of converging aspects in terms of how technologies are being adopted and used. So what we've sort of historically seen is a sort of task-based automation, where individual processes or tasks have been tackled through RPA. We've now seen the advent of the sort of convergence of digital workflow, optical character recognition technologies, data and analytics, all converging so that you can move into looking at end-to-end processes or customer value chains. And as such, we're sort of moving up the adoption curve, where intelligent automation allows sort of greater transformation across end-to-end processes. So you're building in digital workflow to sort of sequence the work, make sure it's routed to the right individuals to address control points, and also to sort of provide necessary approvals. But that is now being done seamlessly, and I think if we took payments processing as an example, that is something that where we've implemented sort of end-to-end solutions which significantly reduce headcount, improve accuracy, improve controls, and reduce operational risk of performing processes, which actually is sort of probably sort of low level in terms of a processing perspective, but very high value to the clients in terms of organizations that perform those actions on behalf of funds, for example. So if we just move on. So I think really sort of get to our sort of first question, if you sort of go into Slido. So where is your organization on their RPA journey? So not yet started, piloting, already implementing, or already in the process of scaling. We've given some indication there around the sort of level of automations.
Starting to see those numbers coming in now. A lot of people piloting, and definitely the majority, though, not yet started. 75%. We haven't seen any implementing actually yet. So, yeah, it looks like everyone here is really at the beginning of those journeys. Last chances to get those numbers in. Still nothing on implementing or scaling. So hopefully that helps you guys for the next part of this conversation. Very much at beginning journeys.
As a second question, what do individuals sort of consider to be the top barriers to actually scaling automation, or even starting, given the answers to the first question?
We've got straight in there with lack of IT readiness, resistance to change, just coming in here. Lack of clear vision, so kind of a trend here, more going towards that kind of getting all people aware, maybe possibly at senior management level, speed to implementation. I think, you know, looking at this, there's a theme: lack of IT readiness. So, you know, big discussions to have on what your internal organizational structure might look like. Again, similar things. We're getting the same kind of answers here. So, as we're seeing, quite a trend towards the beginning of this journey again.
Okay, so I think some sort of clear responses coming through there in terms of lack of IT readiness, and also lack of clear vision as being sort of two of the sort of prime barriers. And then I think closely followed by sort of speed to implement and process fragmentation. I think actually as we go through the presentation, I think there's some potential solutions and answers to actually tackle areas such as sort of speed to implement and the IT readiness aspects of that, as well as then sort of outline how you can tackle process fragmentation. Okay, so thanks everyone for populating that. One of the reasons we asked that was sort of really just to get a sense of some of the local perspectives in comparison to a global survey that Deloitte has been running now for a number of years. So Deloitte's Automation Intelligence Survey has been sort of monitoring a number of questions all the way through the sort of infancy of RPA adoption through to what we're now seeing, where some organizations are sort of maturing and scaling. Interestingly, sort of change this in 2020 from 2019 is that just over 40% of people surveyed actually have now started on their intelligent automation journey with some aspects of RPA. The majority still in a piloting phase, but what we have seen is a sort of increase in people moving into an implementation phase or even scaling. So it's clear that this sort of automation journey is sort of gaining momentum across different organizations. And with regards to the top barriers, I think process fragmentation sort of consistently being at the top, but also sort of resonating with the feedback today, the lack of IT readiness. And I think both of these areas are sort of focused Deloitte's own efforts in terms of both capabilities and solutions that we've been building that hopefully help tackle these sort of key areas in terms of resistance to change. The interesting one in the survey is just resistance to change has sort of dramatically increased in terms of one of the barriers. And I don't know if this then can sort of tie into the sort of lack of clear vision that we sort of saw in terms of the response. where I think certainly undertaking a pilot is quite simple. Implementing the first few automations is simple, but then actually scaling does require a broader sort of change culture within the organization, something that's led from the top. And it may also then involve impacts onto broader operating model considerations. So I think that resistance to change is very much sort of as a result of the sort of increase that we're seeing in the sort of level of automations that are being undertaken. Okay, we just move on to our last one. So I think a couple of further insights from the survey. I think most respondents who started on implementing have sort of done this on a sort of task or process basis, as we can see in terms of the large number of organizations who have implemented some form of RPA. Optical character recognition sort of then grown behind that, and I think if we're looking at this survey next year, I think post-pandemic, I'm sure that has increased significantly as people have moved to sort of remote working. I think what is then increasing in its usage is actually the adoption and embedding of artificial intelligence, and David's going to go on to sort of talk about how artificial intelligence is also now embedded into RPA solutions. But the whole aspect of orchestration, use of digital workflow is something that is now starting to be joined up, and I think a lot of these technologies are now being seen as an ecosystem where you can sort of utilize 2, 3, 4 different technology types to actually deliver automation across end-to-end processes. So over to David.
Thank you very much, Sim. So in this second half of the presentation, what I'm going to do is talk about 2 of the biggest innovations at the moment in this area. The first of which is rise of automation in the cloud, and the second of which is the increasing use as the technology develops of cognitive and AI to complement, shall we say, the existing RPA. So I guess in terms of the cloud, what we're seeing at the moment is when clients are coming to us and they're wanting to get started in this, I would say around 75% of the time now, their initial preference is for it to immediately go in the cloud, this technology, whether we're talking about AI, cognitive, or just even your standard RPA. And that really is a dramatic shift from even 1 or 2 years ago. In terms of what are the key reasons we see as to why automation in the cloud is becoming a lot more popular, faster deployment is definitely a key one. So with deployment in the cloud, you can scale a lot quicker, but also you can get started a lot quicker as well, which I think, given the survey responses, is probably highly relevant for the audience of this presentation as well. So, for example, what often happens with on-premise RPA is you get stakeholders who are really excited to get started, but then what happens is by the time all the infrastructure has been set up internally, all of the security standards for that infrastructure have been defined, signed off, it's all gone through risk. That can be 3 or 6 months in some organizations before you even get started building your first bot. Whereas for some of our recent implementations on the cloud, it's simply been a matter of 2 or 3 weeks or even less, where essentially we're just connecting via secure VPN the organization's systems to essentially our cloud-based intelligent automation platform. So I think faster deployment is one of the primary reasons why organizations are moving more to the cloud around this sort of thing. A related point is then around how quick is it to actually develop the bots, develop the solutions, and cloud offers a number of benefits around that. one thing is when everything is sort of centralized on the cloud, it becomes much easier to share components and modules between different bots, and that naturally speeds up development, as well as the fact that a lot of these newer cloud-based RPA and intelligent automation platforms have really intuitive web-based interfaces, which means that not only is it slightly quicker for experienced developers to develop quickly, but also it promotes the concept of citizen developer, which for those of you who don't know is where essentially you delegate to end users who are very close to the processes that are manual at the moment and causing them frustration, the ability to build some bots, generally on the more simple side, but nevertheless some bots that can quickly help them improve the efficiency of the organization. I guess in terms of some of the other points we've got on here, automation in the cloud is really good for scaling quickly down and up. So this would be in the context, for example, if you've got a business process whereby for most of the year there's 100 transactions coming in a week, but for a month of the year there's 500 or 1,000 transactions coming in, where there's like a massive peak at one time of year. The ability to quickly scale up more instances in the cloud of particular robots to deal with very high peaks in demand is really enhanced when you're talking about automation in the cloud. Generally, costs are lower as well when things are done in the cloud, and also from a license utilization perspective, it's a lot easier to maximize the use of your licenses, and therefore have to buy less licenses in the first place, more bang for your buck. So when everything's in the cloud, you can quite easily get to a model whereby, rather than saying we've automated process A and bot 1 is doing that, and we've automated process B and bot 2 is doing that, and they're both got a different license, they're both from different virtual servers, you can essentially have a pool of virtual servers that can be flexed between different processes you've automated based off what the demand is on any given day or any given time of day. So it generally allows for better license utilization as well, therefore enabling you to maximize the use of all the licenses. And I think the last point around why automation in the cloud is becoming a lot more popular is because it's in the cloud. All the activity you normally need to do to make sure that the versions of everything was kept up to date is essentially largely automatically done for you, as well as the fact that it's then easier to integrate things like RPA into associated technologies, whether that's some of the NI technologies or machine learning, or some things like Python as well, which can often be very useful. So I wanted to give a brief overview of what essentially do we mean by automation in the cloud and automation managed services platforms. And this is based off Deloitte's automation managed services platform, which is called DARA, but the same concept would apply to others. So essentially what we're talking about here is we're talking about it's hosted on cloud, a variety of different providers, whether that's Amazon or Google's cloud, and then essentially you have all of the stack of the various intelligent automation components on there, and essentially the way these things work is there's a separate boxed off instance of that for every organization that wants to use these sort of cloud-based intelligent automation services. It's then just a matter of connecting a given organization's systems via secure VPN to the intelligent automation platform, and then customizing and developing the bots based off the specific solution that's required, the specific processes that need automating. And because it's all in the cloud, a lot of the aspects that would normally have to be dealt with, like the infrastructure or the monitoring of the robots on an ongoing basis, that's typically all handled for you as well, allowing you to more focus on what you want to focus on in the RPA program and the AI program, which essentially is how do we deliver value, how do we deliver benefit. Looking a bit more under the hood of the actual specifics, these are commonly the components of such a platform. So you've got the obvious one in the top left-hand corner, which is the actual technologies in play, and it is RPA, but it's also MI, AI, machine learning, and it's also things like low-code solutions such as OutSystems that provide often the workflow that these solutions need to be fully effective. And you can think of these intelligent automation platforms as a bit like going around your local supermarket. You've got all the different products on the shelf. The different products represent different RPA and intelligent automation tools that may or may not be useful depending on what specifically you want to automate in your business. And you can say, yes, I want a bit of RPA, I want a bit of voice analytics. I don't need the natural language processing at the moment, so I don't get that one, I don't pay for that one. And essentially that's pretty much how it works from a technology perspective. But it's far more than just the technology. It's the service management and the support, making sure it continues to run effectively. It's having the architecture already set up for you, so you don't have to define that. It's having all the security sign-offs already done and all of the risk management already there. It's also having the analytics to talk about how much is the platform being used, what benefits is it deriving. So it's essentially, it is a selection of technologies, but it's more broad than that as well. And I think one of the key benefits for organizations is, rather than having to do all of this yourself, most of it is already done when you go with an existing cloud-based intelligent automation platform. To bring it to life, I've got a video here that I will press play on. I'm sure Rory or Sim will shout louder at me if the video is not playing. But essentially what we've got here is this is a KYC automation that was done on the cloud. And if I pause the video briefly to explain what's going on here. So what we have is, on the left-hand side, we have one component of the intelligent automation platform, which essentially is a workflow solution based on a tool called OutSystems, which is a low-code solution for things like workflows and requesting certain things. And what that's being used for in this case is people are requesting that KYC checks are done on various individuals and various companies. And once that data has been submitted, that then gets transferred to a bot, in this case a UI bot, but it could equally be Automation Anywhere or Blue Prism or any of the other RPA vendors, that's then going and doing various things with that information. So it's going to the company's AML platform and it's updating their records. It's then going to third-party sites like Dow Jones, gathering information on individuals and company structures. And at the end, you'll see it going to Google and doing essentially, searches for, in this case, Tony Blair as a made-up example, but whoever was the investors or whatever the specific scenario was that needed the KYC searches, and then it can then collect that information and then use intelligent automation to collate it and provide a consolidated view back to the risk analyst, as well as updating the relevant systems. So that's just one example of where the cloud managed solutions platforms that are in place now can be really, really helpful in order to achieve the benefits of RPA and intelligent automation, but in a much more efficient and effective manner. The second innovation is showing you some examples of cognitive and AI, and I think also talking about the current state of cognitive and AI. I think we're all familiar with robotic process automation. It's been around for at least 5 years now, and a lot of organizations now have used it in some capacity, whether that's implementing a small number of bots or scaling with RPA. But with regard to cognitive and AI, that's still very much been in development over the last 5 years. And it still is in development. And being frank with you, it will probably always be in development because there's always new innovations that can arise. But I think what has changed quite significantly in the last 2 years is the capabilities of these technologies has dramatically increased. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, quite commonly, we'd go into businesses, we'd managed to automate significant parts of their processes using RPA, which was fantastic. But we'd always get to the stage necessary where there'd be parts of the process that we'd want to automate, but because those parts were more challenging for RPA to deal with, maybe because they relied on unstructured data, for example, it was not possible to automate them, which was frustrating for us, because we want to automate and help our clients as much as possible. But I think the great news now is that technology has been evolving at such a fast pace that while you still can't do absolutely everything and automate 100% of every process, certainly you can automate a lot more than you used to. And now a lot of organizations are increasingly using RPA to automate the really structured parts of their processes that don't require any human intuition, and they're combining that with other tools. And we're talking about a number of different technologies here. So we could be talking about natural language processing, where you're reading full English text and understanding it, and we've got an example of that coming up. We could be talking about speech recognition, where you're not only understanding what's being said, but you're also looking at the tone of what's being said and the mannerisms. And you can imagine instances in call centers, for example, where wanting to understand, how your call center agents interacting with the public, both in terms of what are they saying, but also are they being polite, are they being friendly, are they being courteous, is really, really important. And other things like computer vision and also semi-structured data. And it's really evolving now. And I think, as Sim mentioned earlier, one of the things you'll see is that you've got your top RPA vendors who are increasingly expanding their products, so they combine some cognitive and AI as well. And we'll see an example of that in a minute. And I think the benefit, one of the big benefits of that for organizations, is that then allows them to use both RPA and elements of cognitive without having to buy two different products, which is clearly a benefit to organizations. Right, so you'll be pleased to know that the rest of this section is the actual practical examples of some of these technologies that I'll talk through. And I'll skip along these videos just in the interest of time. I've seen we've got some fantastic questions coming in that we definitely want to answer. But this first example is Automation Anywhere, but Automation Anywhere's intelligent automation component, which is called IQBot. So this is an example that will be common, familiar to everybody attending today, which is invoice processing. And it's clearly a very manual task, getting invoices in, reading them, pulling out data from them, and then updating the financial systems of your organization. What this tool does is it allows you to train it up to essentially extract that data automatically. So the way often these tools work is, rather than coding them, you're essentially training them. So these tools have a general understanding of things like what is an invoice out of the box, and what are the things on an invoice you might want to extract, like what's the date of the invoice, what's the invoice number, what's the payment terms. And then essentially how you commonly train these things is you give them a set, and this is what this is showing on the screen right now. You give them some example, in this case invoices from your own business. The technology has an initial go, and generally it does pretty well in terms of out of the box extracting the information you want, because it has knowledge of common things like invoices. And then through the training process you say, well, okay, Mr. IQBot, you got the invoice total correct, but you didn't get the payment terms correct. Here's the payment terms. And then it then uses its machine learning. Next time it sees one like that or similar, it will then automatically know it. And then once you've trained it up on a sample, which is typically 100 or 200, that's broadly the numbers you need to get high success rates. Depends on the application, of course. You can then connect that with RPA to produce some fantastic results. So in this example, what's on screen now is the technology. After you've trained it in the invoice processing, it's going through and it's extracting automatically the invoice line items into a CSV format, and then it's then connecting with a standard RPA bot that's then taking that CSV information and it's updating the end system, which in this case is SAP. Now, previously, several years ago, you couldn't have really automated much of this process. You could have built the RPA bot element, but without the data from the invoice, the RPA bot wouldn't be able to do anything. But now, given the technology is evolving, you can combine the cognitive with the RPA to essentially automate, for this element of the process at least, it completely end to end, which is absolutely fantastic. The second example I want to show you is a tool called Cogito. So what Cogito does is it's a natural language understanding tool. So this has been the holy grail of cognitive and AI for a number of years, in terms of it's quite easy to read structured data in Excel. It's moderately easy to read semi-structured data, such as invoices. Reading and understanding human English, though, is extremely difficult, but the technology is finally getting there. So what this tool does is it has really good understanding of languages. It has a massive lexicograph of all the key languages in the world, all the common languages anyway, including English. And essentially it understands all the sentence structures, and then it can use that information to pull out what you need. And it has two key elements. The first key element, which I'm showing on screen now, is classification. So this is like a motor insurance example, where essentially there's emails coming in, and essentially what the technology is doing is it's using its knowledge plus rules you've built in to say, well, okay, I'm pretty sure that this example correspondence is around motor policy transfer. I've got a 68.75% probability that that's what it is. And so you can finally start getting applications where, rather than having humans spending most of their day getting things into an inbox from customers and then saying, okay, I need to send this one on to the motor insurance transfer team, and then I need to send this email onto the home insurance team, you can automate all of that now, which is really powerful. The second part of this technology is what it can do is it can actually extract the data. So what it can do is it can say, well, okay, this is a motor policy transfer one, and the key information I want to extract is the customer name, the insurance policy number, and then it can start to then take that information and connect to bots and do things like interrogate the system, search for the policy number, take actions off the back of it. Really, really powerful. And I think a lot of process automation was hamstrung in the past because the initial input to the process was unstructured data, and therefore because of that you couldn't automate much of the downstream. Whereas now with these technologies that can automate the upstream element that can often be unstructured data, you can then automate far more. The last example, which is before I lose my voice completely and hand back over to Sim, is a tool called Reinfer, which is, you can use it for several different things, but emails is one of its speciality. And I don't know about your organizations, but for ours, a hell of a lot of people's time is just spent dealing with emails every day. And if an organization could automate a lot of that dealing with emails, and often if it just had a better idea as to what emails it was spending most of its time on, it could probably dramatically improve its business. What this tool does, and this is why it's really powerful, is you can just point it at an email inbox in your business, and without any knowledge of what that email inbox is about, the department it relates to, it can automatically classify that data. It can automatically classify those emails and say 30% of those emails are all about this, 20% are all about this. And then what you can then do is you can add labels in and say, well, okay, the technology has said that 30% of all the emails I'm dealing with are around X. X, with my knowledge of the business, is actually around margin calls, foreign trade notifications, for example. What can you then do with all of this information and this ability to classify things? Well, one of the things you can do, both initially and on an ongoing basis, is you can generate really powerful MI that essentially is giving you information on, well, okay, in an average month, what am I spending my time doing? What is the department doing around emails? And that can be really, really powerful to help drive both understanding of where efficiencies can be generated, but also in terms of having a really good understanding of what is going on in my business. And I think a lot of the insights around this cannot be underestimated. What you can then also do is essentially take action off the back of that. So what you can do is you can say, well, okay, I've worked out that 30% of my emails coming in around these margin requests. Okay, I'm going to build what this technology calls a trigger, which is where when I get one of those, I'm going to extract this information from the email and then fire that to a bot to then take various action. So this technology helps both with automating the triage and reducing the amount of time people spend doing emails, but you can then automate tasks off the back of it, and it also provides tremendous MI and insight to organizations. So I know that was a whistle-stop tour, but that's some of the ways, some of the examples in which cognitive and AI is really becoming very powerful these days. And I'm now going to hand back over to Sim for some closing thoughts.
Just on mute there, Simeon.
All right, just spotted that. Thanks, David. That was really great insight into sort of automation in the cloud and some of the sort of practical applications that we're seeing and using with clients. So I think as a sort of key takeaway before we move into Q&A, and great to see there's a number of questions coming in. I think we're sort of now seeing sort of automation moving to the cloud as becoming a sort of sensible approach and standard. The ability to sort of be able to adopt a number of different technology solutions to apply to automation makes sense when you're sort of having that sort of off-the-shelf purchase through cloud and consuming what you use. You're not then having to sort of invest in training, invest in the infrastructure, and sort of keep on top of what is a rapidly evolving sort of vendor landscape. So I think whilst cognitive and AI technologies are moving at pace, I think we sort of still see that we're quite at the start of the overall digital journey. So this is only going to be set to evolve. And then finally, sort of around early adopters, we're now seeing organizations that we're working with moving to and moving away from processing of individual tasks, but into either reimagining their customer experience through use of automation and AI technologies, and then looking at end-to-end value chains in terms of driving out further benefits, not only in cost reduction, but reduced operational risk, improved customer and employee experiences, and just generally freeing up capacity to look at higher value activities to perform within the organization. First one, sort of how can we convey to senior management that they need to spend on internal infrastructure to further AI advancement? I think there are a number of pointers here. I think there's a lot of sort of surveys out there. I think not only Deloitte's own surveys, but further industry benchmarks that can be used just to sort of showcase how the sort of broader market and innovation is happening. Deloitte did a sort of recent report with the World Economic Forum, which also incorporated a number of sort of digital leaders across industry, which have explored a number of different areas in terms of how technology and innovation can be adopted within organisations. The way we would do this at Deloitte is actually having a sort of digital lab with clients where we sort of bring in executive teams and work through from sort of strategy of the business and how digital transformation could support that strategy, and then we sort of hone in and focus on particular areas such as growth or sort of capacity release, cost reduction, etc., in terms of what the prime drivers are for that. And I think underpinning that is then the required investment, but then it's sort of really sort of honing in on what that payback period for that investment would be, but also then exploring the different alternative delivery approaches. So I think today we've explored the ability to sort of buy in sort of cloud services rather than build out your own infrastructure, which sort of should have a sort of faster sort of speed to business value, but then also a lower cost to implement and maintain. If you've got anything further to add on that one, David.
No, I think that's a good summary. I think a lot of this. Sorry, a bit of crosstalk there. But I think a lot of this is just around getting senior management to understand it and getting them excited. And that can be as simple as doing a simple pilot on your actual processes, and then the business case, as you say, Sim, to back it up, and then once they're excited about it and they understand the business case, then the conversation about the investment around infrastructure should become an awful lot easier.
I think that sort of flows into the next question quite well in terms of organisations fairly locked down with data and using sort of third-party applications. What can we do sort of internally to get started? And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there, David, in terms of actually starting small and then looking to scale is probably the right answer when tackling automation, and actually picking an area or pain point within the organisation that can demonstrate value. A pilot or proof of concept on a particular process would be my recommendation. And they're all in terms of identifying that sort of process there. We've now got innovative tools that can do process mining. That we've even got a tool that will take text-based process descriptions or task level descriptions. That is then sort of pushed through the algorithm that we've built based on multiple different engagements on robotics process automation, and it then spits out a starting point in terms of recommended task or process areas which would yield strong benefits from automation. So number of sort of rapid techniques to be able to get started on an automation journey. I think, David, you've probably got lots of practical examples of ones that you've delivered as a proof of concept, and probably worth just sort of talking a little bit about how quickly these things can actually be established and set up in sort of showcasing the benefits.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think particularly on the cloud, it can be quite straightforward and very quick. So I think there's two components: there's getting the infrastructure set up, and then writing the pilot bot, essentially. And with the cloud, as we talked about earlier, because you can utilize infrastructure that's already there on the cloud, that first step can be really, really quick. And then in terms of the actual customization of the bot and coming up with a pilot, you can do something that in 2 or 3 weeks that's pretty robust. and gives a good baseline in terms of showing that to senior management, recording a video of it, getting some interest and buzz around the organisation. So I'm not saying after 2 to 3 weeks that solution is necessarily fully ready to go live, but certainly in terms of proving the concept, you can do things really quickly with the technology nowadays.
Next question: Do we have examples of cost savings? Jersey across finance and law that can use to convince senior leadership that it's worth the investment. So I think the answer is yes. We've got a number of different case studies. So I think it depends on the sort of process sector, process areas, the sort of particular sector. But David, I don't know if you want to give one example of typical process savings.
No, I mean, sure. I mean, interestingly, one of the first bots we built with a client on the island was in fact a law firm who had significant challenges around just inefficiencies of their processes around trademark applications and renewals, and they were finding that really inefficient, and also having challenges dealing with spikes in demand, because it wasn't a level request all through the year, particularly around December time. There was a massive peak in that, and so one of the first bots we built, which had a significant, just one bot reduced there by around, I think it was around 25%. The end-to-end time to process applications and renewals. So that was one of the first automations we built on the Channel Islands, in fact, a number of years ago. And in finance is quite a common area for automation. Deloitte itself, in our shared service centre, we automated a lot of the finance processes around things like reconciliations and consolidations internally. And I don't know who asked that question, but if there's interest in diving into that in more detail, we've got things like further examples and also heat maps of the whole functions of like a finance department, and which are the good areas to go after in terms of automation first.
Yeah, and I think from a law perspective as well, our sort of broader Deloitte firm has its own sort of legal division now, and we've got a ventures team within there where we sort of incubating a number of new technology companies in terms of legal tech, and growing them in terms of providing technology solutions for law firms, particularly around the sort of contract management side of things. We've got sort of AI-driven proofreading technologies that we've developed that will sort of aid contract reviews, and then sort of forensic technology that can sort of go away and do sort of investigations and actually look at underlying data supporting cases. So I think we're certainly worth reaching out to myself and David if there are sort of more specific follow-ups that you'd like to find out about. Okay. Next question. This is a really interesting one, and Rory probably will have a perspective as well in terms of how do we think Jersey compares with the rest of the world. And I'll probably sort of answer it in two ways from my perspective. I think one, we've got to think about our sort of main sort of sector in terms of sort of businesses that we service through Jersey. So in terms of the very well established financial services sector, very predominantly driven through international banking and the alternative assets sector. I think as an alternative assets sector and sort of asset service provision, it's probably sort of playing catch up on the sort of automation journey. I think there have been a number of factors to sort of consider that have meant that automation's not accelerated as fast as it has done in sort of other sectors such as sort of retail banking, for example. But I think given the sort of flow of assets through the island and the data that is sort of subsequently held, I think organisations have got sort of impetus to sort of automate, if not only to sort of free up capacity constraints within teams. There's a lot of operational pressure at the moment within firms, and also then the ability to sort of consolidate operations and processes across operations where firms are operating across jurisdictions. So I think we're, in that sense, on a par with other jurisdictions. The one positive I will say around Jersey is actually we're probably well ahead of the curve in terms of the ecosystem and the infrastructure that's sort of been built out. So the sort of cohesiveness between Digital Jersey, Jersey Finance, the government and the regulator, we're sort of very well positioned from an ecosystem perspective to sort of fully take advantage of the growth in that sort of broader digital transformation. I don't know, Rory, if you've got any of your own perspectives on that question.
Yeah, I think we were literally at a session on Monday night with Malcolm, and well attended for Digital Jersey's kind of first physical event. And we're not necessarily talking about AI and coding anymore. There are lots of applications that use AI that you drag and drop and are much more accessible than people maybe think. And Davy's examples there were great, and I think that example of the heat map you were discussing would be a great visual for people to get a handle on how to start attacking it, because I think it's just, fear is a strong word, but it's just the unknown. I think people just don't know necessarily where to start. It seems like a big beast, and you've talked there. It's it's about giving examples, researching your competition, seeing where your industry is in this area, then start cleansing your data, get involved with RPA, move on to your machine learning and AI. There's quite a clear journey out there if you start investigating it, and I think we'd love to share your examples, because like you said, Jersey, sometimes we're always starting right on a back foot, and you've mentioned they're not necessarily in this area, but it's our ability to talk to the blocks very, very quickly within that square mile of Jersey where everything seems to exist, that we can actually have those conversations much more quickly. So I'm very hopeful. I'm biased. It's not the future, it's the now. I'm very into this, and even recently I was doing a course at Digital Leadership about some churn about the marketing area of AI, and then sure enough the next day Waitrose dropped me some vouchers about some things that I had just stopped buying, and and I had to congratulate them a little bit and go, yeah, I know what you've done there, but this is the future, and Jersey needs to get on board, whether that's finance, law, retail, and I think the steps that you've laid out here have been really interesting to talk about those journeys, because as the slide I said at the beginning, I think a lot of people listening to this are at the beginning of that. So I don't know if was there another question to come?
Quite a few more.
I think we've got a few more, so we may, depending on the time, we may just sort of respond to those.
There's still people here. I get to see behind the scenes, and I get to see the attendees. So let's crack on. Just get those last few done. Definitely. That's
great. So how long does the data cleansing piece take, and how expensive is it? This is quite an open question. I think what I will say is I think there are a number of sort of cloud solutions now in terms of supporting data cleansing, the ability to actually apply technology to understanding data, both in terms of where it resides in your organization, but then how it maps against things like sort of GDPR components around personally identifiable information, being able to sort of assess through tooling how compliant that data is. So I think it's probably worth a follow-up if there's more detail. It's probably a whole webinar in itself in terms of sort of data management, governance, and actually some of the migration topics that need to be covered. So not exactly answered the question, but certainly happy to explore that more.
I think on the next question, is cloud better than internal servers, security versus speed? So I think it certainly has a lot of benefits over it. I think from a security perspective, I'm not saying that you can't get the same level of security when you do it on premise. You certainly can, but I guess the advantage you have with the cloud, and this applies to the speed point as well, is that so much is pre-built for you already, and therefore you don't need to go through the several-month-long process of working out how to do security effectively and get in place all the guidelines and set everything up, because it's already there for you. So yes, you could get to that stage on premise, and certainly before cloud became popular, many organizations had to and did successfully manage to. But the advantage of the cloud is most of that's pre-built for you, and it's already gone through all the security sign-offs, etc.
Yeah, and I think from a security perspective, we sort of just run a sort of series of 4 webinars on cyber security. I think one of the key risks is still sort of the people risk in terms of managing that, in terms of access through different threat actors into the organisation. So I think the sort of broader, irrespective of cloud or on premise, the sort of the broader risk framework and controls that need to be kept up to date, and also then sort of tested in terms of making sort of the organisation secure. Next one, if we come to rely on artificial intelligence for auditing and compliance, how do you explain how this works to the board or external auditors? So we'll probably send around a link as well to a sort of quite a wide-ranging report that we did with the World Economic Forum, which focused one of the sort of sections within that report sort of focused on the sort of explainability of AI, and I think there is a need to be able to explain sort of for how AI is operating to enable meaningful risk management and accountability. So I think the conclusion of the report did say, however, that sort of interrogating the underlying AI is not universally actually the best approach to managing the explainability, and that different methods will need to be developed to sort of show how explanation is needed, and some of that is probably the sort of concept of human in the loop, and be able to sort of show how the AI is sort of mimicking human decisions. So I think this is certainly an evolving area, and particularly around sort of there's a lot of sort of talk about sort of algorithmic bias at the moment. So AI does have to have the right safeguards in terms of preventing and providing the underlying rationale to evidence those decisions. And central to that is going to be sort of building trust, both for sort of customers, but also within organisations for employees. And I think this is sort of a new sort of evolution of sort of explainable or ethically based AI. I don't know if that sort of cropped up in any client conversations recently, David.
It's commonly a sort of question. I think, as you say, Sim, it's more of a complicated matter than just one simple solution. And I think it is very much a case of you've got your standard use cases, and then you've got where the AI is being used to make decisions, which is then a slightly more challenging situation. I think as well that the technology's evolved a lot, and it's a lot less of a black box than it used to be. And I think that definitely helps in terms of a lot of that understanding and being able to justify, whether it's to the board or to external auditors, exactly that, this technology is working, it is sound, and also it's not making its decisions in a biased manner. But yeah, it is clearly an area of evolving consideration, particularly where you have AI in a decision-making setting.
Yeah. Next question. Do we find that regulation is being a barrier for the adoption and use of AI automation for your clients, and how is the regulatory space evolving around this? So certainly the widespread adoption of AI now has the sort of potential to create this sort of different kind of financial system. There's a lot of open banking, sort of introduce sort of data sharing, etc. And I think there's a realization that sort of emerging risks actually don't always sit neatly inside the sort of supervised sort of institution in terms of how they're being supervised by regulators. So I think the growth has got to come sort of hand in hand with sort of the sort of evolving regulatory space. But I'd say we're already seeing that. So I think use of the sort of innovation hub, for example, with Jersey's regulator, we've got sort of similar sort of sandboxes with the FCA in London, where we've actually had some Deloitte teams sort of be engaged with the sandbox and actually sort of get different sort of AI-driven applications through that in terms of gaining regulatory support. So I think that the principles are really, and this sort of goes both from a sort of business perspective, developing their own solutions, but also for vendors in the space is just keeping that dialogue open with the regulators and supervisors, and sort of engaging early in programs to sort of outline what is intended.
Yeah, and I suppose on the last question, how well has AI improved on multilingual applications? Can we trust it for global comms? So yeah, I mean, language is a key factor around many of the technologies, including the ones I showed there, where it was doing natural language understanding. For those to work, the technology has to have, in those cases, an understanding of English. But I think the good news is that when you look at those technologies, including the ones that I demonstrated, it's not like they've just built an English version, and if it's not in English, it can't be done. These technologies cover a range of common languages. Do they cover every single language in the world? Well, no. So I think in terms of your question around, can we trust it for global comms? I think it's very much understanding the products, what languages they support, and then looking at your business and saying, does the tool support the languages that are commonly used in my business interactions globally across my organization? But I think you will find nowadays that unless, for example, you've got a significant rare language, shall we say, that's common in your business, these common tools will support the range of languages that your business is likely going to need them to.
And actually the way that translation applications work now, and these are sort of embedded into Microsoft products or Google Translate, they're actually a great example of how natural language processing and sort of the algorithms that underpin that are being used. That there's no sort of sets of dictionaries in these solutions. They're all driven through machine learning.
Stick myself back in there. So yeah, I mean, that last point, yeah, definitely is when it comes to languages. Actually for a few years now, even in the school environment, we've been using the auto translate while speaking for students as English as a second language, and we've seen that rise massively. I had a Russian student once I said to her, "Is it good?" And she goes, "It's passable, but it's helped me to get by it." So yeah, as a first step, obviously, I think the modern foreign language at my own school would say never trust it. We know the inflections and XYZ, but it just goes to show that we're already at that level dealing with multi-language, not just looking at numbers, not just looking at very simple things. I mean, neural nets have absolutely, just rapidly increased what's possible. And I'd love to hear that about the fact you've kind of got an R&D department, the rise of innovation officers coming through. I think that's great to hear from businesses. Failing isn't something that should be avoided. People should be trying new things, and those companies will succeed better than those that just want to avoid risk at all times. Everything comes with that, and AI will help you to manage that risk. And like you were saying there before, David, about cloud security and everything like that, and the speed at which you can get started. Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. Been in the cloud for many years, and it's a conversation that if your business is quite locked down, as many are, that's possibly the first conversation that you need to have before having these other ones about that acceptance of risk and the benefits that can happen through it. It's not to say you can't do things internally, but as you said, David, it's just going to rapidly increase coming through. And just last point for me, I want that email application. I want something to filter through my emails that just come through and tell me which ones are important, which ones aren't, not just people have flagged them. So I'll definitely be following up from this conversation today. And it's been really interesting to hear the wide array of things you've talked about, how you can attack it, the different things to engage with senior management. I think we've only just started this conversation in Jersey locally, but it's nice to see the examples now. We're not talking about theoreticals like it was kind of last year, the year before it. You've got solid examples, things that are working in your organization, and those kind of heat maps to show people where to go. So exciting times, and I think people should really follow up with this, and we'll send some information out, and feel free to contact us at Digital Jersey as well to pass information or questions back to Simeon and David, but you know where they are at Deloitte. So thank you very much again, and it's been another interesting tech talk. There's going to be more to come, so keep posted. And I can't thank you enough for getting involved. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Roy. Thanks, everybody.